Two households, same city, same employer, same salary, down to the dollar. 10 years later, one of them is financially untouchable and the other is 3 missed paychecks from a serious problem. Same income, completely different outcome. That gap is not explained by salary, it is explained by something else entirely, and that something else is what this entire video is about. Most people think of wealth in terms of earnings, what you make per year, what your title says, what the offer letter looked like. That framing is understandable and almost completely wrong. Earnings are an input. Wealth is what survives when the earnings stop. Those are not the same thing, and confusing them is the single most common reason people with high incomes arrive at retirement with nothing structural underneath them. So before we walk through every level from zero to $1 billion dynasty, we need to agree on what we are actually measuring, because the scoreboard matters. If you are tracking the wrong number, you can be winning a game that does not exist. What generational wealth actually is. Generational wealth is not a large income. It is not an expensive house in a good zip code. It is not a retirement account with a healthy balance that disappears when the person who built it disappears with it. Generational wealth is a system. It is a set of assets, structures, and behaviors that continue producing, compounding, or protecting value, independent of whether the original earner is still working, still healthy, or still alive. The key word is outlive. The wealth has to outlive the person. If it doesn't, it was never generational. It was personal accumulation, which is genuinely valuable, but it is a different thing. A business that requires its founder to function is not generational wealth. It is a high-paying job with equity risk. A house that will be sold to divide among heirs is not generational wealth. It is a single illiquid asset that converts to cash once and disappears. A portfolio with no instruction set, no legal structure, no named steward is not generational wealth. It is money waiting to be spent by people who did not build it. The system has to be designed. That design is what separates levels, the 4 numbers that actually tell the story. At every level in this video, we will return to the same 4 measurements. Net worth is the starting point, assets minus liabilities, but it is the least important number on the list by itself, because net worth tells you what exists. It does not tell you what survives. Liquidity runway is how many months you can maintain your current life without any new income, not how much cash you have, how long it lasts. Someone with $40,000 in savings and $8,000 in monthly obligations has 5 months of runway. Someone with $40,000 in savings and $2,100 in monthly obligations has 19 months. Same balance, completely different position. The second person can weather a job loss, a health event, a market downturn without making a desperate decision. Desperate decisions are where wealth levels collapse. Income durability asks how many separate, structurally different sources of income you have, and how many of them require your active presence to keep functioning. One job is not durable. It is one decision by one employer away from zero. Dividends, rental income, business distributions, a spouse's separate income, a royalty, these layer. Each layer reduces the catastrophic risk of any single disruption. Durability is not about being rich. It is about being resistant. Downside risk is the question most people do not ask until it is already answering itself. What is the worst realistic outcome for this asset, this structure, this decision, and how does that outcome affect everything else? Concentrated positions have high upside and brutal downside. Diversified positions have capped upside and survivable downside. Neither is wrong, but you have to know which one you are holding and why. How debt changes everything. Debt is not inherently dangerous. Debt is a tool, and like every tool, the outcome depends entirely on what you use it for. A mortgage on a property that produces rental income in excess of its carrying cost is a lever. It amplifies return. A mortgage on a primary residence is a commitment, not a lever, but it may provide structural stability that pure investing cannot. Consumer debt on depreciating assets is neither. It is a subtraction that compounds against you. The difference between wealth levels is often not how much debt someone holds. It is what that debt is attached to. At lower levels, debt tends to be attached to consumption. At higher levels, it tends to be attached to assets that produce income or appreciate. That shift is not automatic. It is a decision that has to be made, usually more than once, usually under pressure. The bottleneck that almost no one talks about here is a thing that ends more wealth building trajectories than any market crash, any bad investment, any single financial mistake. It is cash flow volatility in the first 6 to 12 months of any new financial structure. The month the mortgage starts, the month you launch the business, the month you leave the stable job for the higher upside opportunity. The income and expense picture looks different on paper than it does in real life. And that gap, that 6 months between the plan and the reality, is where people abandon systems that would have worked. Stability compounds. The household that survives the first unstable year with the system intact tends to stabilize faster in year 2. The household that dismantles the system under early pressure starts over. Starting over is expensive in ways that do not show up in a single transaction. When a level becomes permanent, every level in this video has a version that is temporary and a version that sticks. The difference is always the same question. What has to remain true for this position to hold? If the answer is one job, one market, one person, one condition, the level is fragile. If the answer is a set of diversified self-reinforcing structures that do not all fail at the same time, the level is becoming durable. Mobility is moving up. Permanence is not sliding back. Both matter. Neither is guaranteed by the income alone. That is the framework. Now let's walk through every level. The first dollar that actually works for you. Most people do not have a savings problem. They have a leak problem. The money arrives and leaves in a pattern that feels like lifestyle and is actually just friction. Subscriptions nobody checks. Minimum payments on balances that never move. A grocery run that costs $190 when the plan was $80. None of these are catastrophic individually. Together, across 24 months, they are the difference between having a $6,000 emergency fund and having nothing to absorb the transmission that fails in February. The budget that works is not the budget that is most precise. It is the budget that is honest about what you actually do and then automates around it. Fixed expenses go out automatically. Savings transfer on the same day as a paycheck. What remains is what you spend. You do not track every dollar after that. You designed the system before the money arrived. That is a distinction. The emergency fund is not optional and it is not an investment. It is 3 to 6 months of real obligations sitting in a high yield savings account earning something modest while its actual job is to prevent you from making a decision under pressure. You build it before you optimize anything else because without it, every market correction, every job disruption, every medical bill is a crisis that unwinds whatever structure you built. The fund is not a reward. It is load bearing. Then you look at the debt. Not all debt the same way, but categorically. Anything above 8% interest is a guaranteed negative return on every dollar you do not apply to it. You eliminate the highest rate balances first. You do not do this slowly. You do it aggressively with the urgency that the math actually warrants. When the toxic debt is gone, the credit profile that remains becomes a tool. Lower cost of capital. Access to leverage you can use intentionally. A credit score that does not force you into punishing terms when you actually need to borrow. These 3 moves, stopping the leaks, building runway, eliminating toxic debt, are not glamorous. They are the floor. Without the floor, every other move has no surface to stand on. From first investments to the first 100,000. The employer match is the only guaranteed 100% return available to you and the only reason to prioritize it before anything else in the portfolio. You contribute exactly enough to capture it. You do not leave it on the table because there is no financial argument for leaving it on the table. After that, the Roth IRA, index funds, broad market exposure, low fees. You automate the contribution so the decision only happens once. Then you do not touch it. The market will drop. You will read something alarming. A coworker will tell you about something that is definitely going to work. You will feel the pull to act. You do not act. You add to your position at the same rate you always did, and you let the thing run. Getting from $10,000 invested to $100,000 is mostly a savings rate problem. The portfolio is too small for compounding to carry the weight. Your behavior has to carry it. That means the career trajectory matters as much as the investment allocation. Every salary increase that does not become a lifestyle increase goes into the portfolio. You negotiate, you take on scope, you develop skills that have market value outside the current employer so that you are not repriced by one company's budget cycle. The gap between what you earn and what you spend is the only variable that moves the number at this stage. The lifestyle inflation trap arrives quietly. The raise happens and the monthly picture expands to absorb it within 90 days, almost automatically, because the spending finds the room. You close the room before the spending arrives. You redirect the increase on the same week it appears in the paycheck. Waiting until next month is how it disappears. From $1 million to $10 million, and the things that stop people there. The shift from $100,000 to $1 million is still mostly a savings and compounding problem. The shift from $1 million to $10 million is a different problem entirely. It requires something concentrated. A business with equity you own, real estate acquired at the right basis with durable cash flow. A career position that compensates in equity, not just salary. At some point, index funds alone do not reach the upper end of this range on a typical income trajectory without decades and unusually high savings rates. You need an asset that can run faster than your contributions. That is the argument for concentration. But concentration is where people also get erased. A business that is undercapitalized, overleveraged, or dependent on one client is not an asset. It is a liability wearing an asset's clothes. Real estate purchased at the top of a local cycle with aggressive debt and thin margins does not compound. It survives if you are lucky, and it fails if the vacancy runs 3 months longer than the model assumed. The diversification question is about timing. You hold concentration while the asset is still compounding at rates that justify the risk. You begin distributing it into broader holdings when the position size represents a consequence you cannot absorb if it goes wrong. That threshold is personal, but it is a threshold, not a preference, and you have to name it before you reach it. The derailers at this range are consistent. Taxes that were never modeled, a single income stream that a health event or a market cycle can interrupt. A partnership without a documented agreement that holds under stress. And the identity that never shifted from the person who earns to the person who owns. That shift is the real work of this range. The consumer optimizes spending. The owner builds systems that produce. Once the systems run, you are no longer trading time for the outcome. The outcome is structural. That is what the next level is built on. At $10 million, the math is no longer the primary danger. The math is largely solved. The danger now is governance. What destroys wealth at this level is not a bad market year. It is a structure that was never built, a family that was never aligned, and a set of decisions that scaled without the systems required to hold them, preserving the base, then building beyond it. The first move at $10 million is professionalizing what was previously informal. That means a fee-only wealth management relationship with a fiduciary obligation in writing. It means tax counsel that is not reactive but forward-looking. Modeling the next 5 years before they arrive. It means an investment policy statement, an actual document that defines acceptable risk, liquidity requirements, and the purpose of each account before any market event creates pressure to improvise. The portfolio at this level is no longer a single index fund and a Roth IRA. It is an allocation that balances liquidity, growth, and protection across accounts with different tax treatments. You hold enough in accessible, diversified public markets to survive any private illiquidity event. You do not let the portfolio become a collection of illiquid bets that cannot be exited without consequence. From $50 million, access opens. Private equity, direct real estate at institutional scale, co-investment alongside funds that were previously close to you. That access is real, and it creates genuine compounding opportunities. It also creates illiquidity risk that most people underestimate until a capital call arrives in the same quarter that something else needs cash. You model the liquidity waterfall before you deploy. You do not assume the exit happens when the exit is convenient. Operating businesses at this range carry a different risk category. Concentration, key person dependency, reputation exposure. A business that represents 60% of a $100 million net worth is not a portfolio. It is a single bet. The governance structure around it, a real board, documented succession, defined compensation for family members who work in it versus family members who own it, is not optional bureaucracy. It is the mechanism that prevents one bad decision from touching everything else, scaling ownership without destroying what you built. From $200 million toward $1 billion, the challenge changes again. The question is no longer whether the asset compounds. The question is whether the structure around it can handle scale without introducing new fragility. Acquisitions made quickly without integration planning. Partnerships that dilute control without documented thresholds. Expansion into markets where the operating model does not transfer. These are the mechanisms of value destruction at this range, and they are not obvious while they are happening. They look like growth. The governance layer here is architectural. Family offices with clear mandates. An investment committee with defined authority and documented decision criteria. A legal entity structure that separates operating assets from investment assets from family personal assets. Not because the family distrusts itself, but because separation is the only thing that contains a problem to its actual size when one emerges. Estate planning at this level is not a conversation you have once with an attorney. It is an ongoing coordination between tax counsel, estate attorneys, insurance specialists, and the family members who will eventually inherit. Irrevocable trusts, grantor retained annuity trusts, dynasty trusts in favorable jurisdictions, life insurance held outside the taxable estate. These instruments are not evasion. They are the difference between a transfer that arrives intact and one that arrives after a 40% federal haircut. The systems that hold across generations, the statistic is old and accurate, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first builds it, the second manages it, the third spends it. The reason is not that the third generation is less capable. The reason is that wealth was transferred without the values, structures, and operating knowledge required to hold it. Family systems that survive generations have explicit agreements about what ownership means, what a family member must demonstrate before receiving a governance role, how distributions are decided, how conflict is resolved before it becomes litigation. These are not comfortable conversations. They are the ones that determine whether the dynasty is a metaphor or a fact. Philanthropy belongs inside this architecture, not outside it. A donor-advised fund or a family foundation with a clear giving philosophy does 2 things simultaneously. It deploys capital toward outcomes of family values, and it gives the next generation a governance structure to participate in before they inherit the full weight of the operating assets. The foundation becomes a training ground. It becomes a shared purpose. It becomes a thing that a family talks about at dinner that is not about money and is entirely about values. The level you are at right now is not the level this section describes, but the principles underneath it are the same principles that were underneath the emergency fund and the first Roth contribution, and the index fund you did not sell during the correction. Build the system before you need it. Let the structure do the work. And subscribe, because the next breakdown covers the specific toolkit for whichever level you are actually standing in right now.